I never thought a strawberry would change my life, but that's exactly how it happened on that crisp autumn day outside Newark. The city had been suffocating me for weeks, maps and blueprints and endless digital renderings until my eyes burned. That's why I'd escaped to William's family farm, where the promise of fresh air and something real between my fingers seemed like salvation. "You're holding it wrong," a voice said behind me, startling me so badly I nearly crushed the berry in my hand. I turned to find myself face to face with a woman whose smile hit me like a physical force. Blonde hair caught the afternoon sunlight, blue eyes crinkled at the corners with amusement, and there was something in her stance, confidence without arrogance, that immediately intrigued me. "There's a wrong way to hold a strawberry?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Absolutely." She plucked it from my fingers, her skin brushing mine. "You'll bruise the flesh. Think of it like a small treasure." Something about the way she said treasure made my cheeks flush, and I was grateful for the cool autumn air that might explain away the reaction. "I'm Stella," she said, popping my strawberry into her mouth with a mischievous grin. "And I bet I can find a better one than that." The challenge in her eyes was impossible to resist. "I'm Lydia, and you're on." For the next hour, we competed like children, holding up berries for inspection, debating the merits of size versus sweetness, color versus shape. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt so present, so far removed from deadline pressures and client demands. "So what do you do, Lydia, when you're not becoming an expert strawberry hunter?" she asked as we moved down the rows. "I make maps," I said. "I'm a cartographer. Mostly digital now, but sometimes historical preservation work." Her eyes lit up instantly. "No way, The rest of her sentence was cut off by a sudden crack of thunder that seemed to split the sky. Within seconds, fat raindrops began pelting down, sending everyone in the field running for cover. Stella grabbed my hand without hesitation, pulling me toward a wooden shelter at the edge of the field. Her fingers felt warm despite the chill in the air, and I followed without question, both of us laughing as we raced through the increasingly heavy downpour. By the time we reached the shelter, we were soaked through. My black hair was plastered to my face, and droplets clung to Stella's eyelashes like tiny crystals. Other pickers huddled nearby, but somehow in the small space, it felt like just the two of us. "Here," she said, offering me the small basket of berries she'd managed to save. "I think I won our contest." I pulled out the single perfect strawberry I'd tucked safely in my jacket pocket. "I respectfully disagree." We both burst out laughing, and something shifted between us in that moment, something as subtle and significant as the changing weather outside. "So you make maps," she said, leaning against one of the wooden posts. "I find places that need mapping. I'm an explorer, basically. Adventure photographer officially." Of course she was. Everything about her, from her weathered boots to the confidence in her stance, spoke of someone who didn't stay still for long. Someone who sought out new horizons while I spent my days carefully documenting what others had already discovered. "Opposites," I murmured, not realizing I'd spoken aloud until she tilted her head. "Sometimes opposites are exactly what we need," she said, her voice softer than before. The rain drummed steadily on the roof above us, creating a strange pocket of intimacy as we shared strawberries and stories. 1 hour stretched into 2, and by the time the sky cleared, I felt as though I'd known her for years rather than an afternoon. "Well, Lydia Clark, mapmaker extraordinaire," she said as we finally headed back toward the parking lot. "Maybe our paths will cross again." I nodded, suddenly reluctant to return to my ordered life in the city. "I'd like that." What I didn't say was how much I'd like it. I didn't mention the strange pull I felt toward her, or how the afternoon had awakened something I'd buried beneath work and routine. I simply smiled and watched her walk away, never suspecting that the rain-soaked day was just the beginning of our story. 3 days after the strawberry farm, I was elbow-deep in topographical data when my office phone rang. Not many people called the landline, most clients preferred email, so I almost let it go to voicemail. Thank God I didn't. "Lydia Clark, Newark Cartography Partners." The strawberry judge. That voice, rich with humor and instantly recognizable. I sat up straighter, suddenly aware of my messy bun and coffee-stained sweater. Ridiculous since she couldn't see me. "Stella, how did you find me?" "Professional hazard. I'm good at finding things." She paused. "And you're the only cartographer named Lydia Clark in Newark." I smiled despite myself. "Fair point. What can I do for you? Meet me for coffee? I have a proposition." The word proposition hung in the air between us, charged with possibilities I wasn't ready to examine. Professional or personal? Both, if we're lucky. Before I could respond, she added, Milton's Cafe on Broadway, 4:30? Unless you're busy mapping something crucial. I glanced at my screen, a drainage system redesign that could certainly wait. 4:30 works. I changed shirts 3 times before heading to Milton's, which was ridiculous. This was professional, probably. The cafe was packed with afternoon commuters, but I spotted Stella immediately, her blonde hair catching the light from the window. She'd secured a quiet corner table and waved me over with a smile that made my stomach flip. You look different without strawberry stains on your hands, she said as I sat down. Professional hazard, I echoed her earlier words. Maps are cleaner than berries. The waitress appeared and Stella ordered for both of us, though how she knew I preferred chai lattes remained a mystery. When we were alone again, she pulled out a worn leather portfolio. I need a cartographer, she said, getting straight to the point. I'm working on a project documenting forgotten historical sites around Newark before urban development swallows them completely. She slid photographs across the table and I caught my breath. The images were stunning. Abandoned factories with light streaming through broken windows, hidden courtyards tangled with ivy, underground chambers I'd never known existed beneath our city. These are incredible, I said honestly. Thanks. Her fingers brushed mine as she pointed to one photo. This old textile mill is scheduled for demolition next month. There's historical preservation potential, but the city needs detailed mapping of the original structures beneath later additions. I studied the complex architecture. You need someone to make sense of the layers. Exactly. Her eyes met mine. You see things others miss. It's what cartographers do, right? The enthusiasm in her voice was contagious. I found myself nodding before I'd consciously decided. So when would you need this done? Yesterday, she grinned, but next week would work. We spent the next hour discussing details, access permissions, equipment needs, timeframes. But beneath the professional conversation ran something else. A current of awareness that made each accidental touch of our hands feel significant. You should come see my studio, I said impulsively as we finished our drinks. I have some historical maps of Newark that might help identify original building foundations. 20 minutes later, Stella was wandering my workspace, fingertips trailing over framed maps and drafting tables while I searched through my archives. The late afternoon light streamed through the windows, catching dust motes and the gold in her hair. These are beautiful, she said, examining a series of hand-drawn maps I'd created for a local history project. You don't just record places, you honor them. Something in her voice made me look up. The admiration in her eyes was genuine, and I felt seen in a way that was both unsettling and exhilarating. This might help, I said, pulling an oversized atlas from my bookshelf. It's from 1887, before the industrial expansion. We leaned over the book together, shoulders touching as I carefully turned brittle pages. The proximity was distracting, her scent a mixture of coffee and something citrusy, her breath warm against my cheek as she pointed out landmarks. Wait, she said suddenly. What's that? As I turned a page, something slipped from the binding. An old photograph, sepia-toned and slightly curled at the edges. I caught it before it could float to the floor. 2 women stood before an imposing Victorian mansion, their posture stiff in the way of old photographs, but their eyes holding something that felt startlingly intimate. I turned it over, and my breath caught at the faded handwriting. Elizabeth and Margaret, Hawthorne Estate, 1923. Do you know them? Stella asked, her face now so close to mine I could see flecks of darker blue in her eyes. The estate? My voice sounded strange even to my own ears. That's my grandmother's family home. Or it was, before it was sold. Something shifted between us then. The air grew charged, the accidental brush of her fingers against mine as she took the photograph no longer feeling accidental at all. And when she leaned forward to examine the image more closely, I found myself unable to look away from her profile, from the slight curve of her lips as they parted in concentration. Lydia, she said softly, finally turning to meet my gaze. Our faces were inches apart. For one breathless moment, I thought she might kiss me. For one breathless moment, I wanted her to. Instead, she smiled and tapped the photograph. I think we just found our next adventure. The photograph trembled slightly in my hands as I stared at the two women. Their faces seemed to look back through time, challenging me to uncover something long buried. "My grandmother Elizabeth," I said, pointing to the taller woman with dark hair pulled back severely. "But I don't know who Margaret is." Stella gently took the photograph, examining it under my desk lamp. "They look close." There was something in her tone that made me look again. The women stood with proper distance between them, as was customary for the era, but their hands were positioned strangely, almost touching but not quite, as if the photographer had caught them pulling apart. "Turn it over again," I suggested. Beyond the names and location, there was additional writing that had faded almost to invisibility. "The key lies where the roses meet the water. Remember our promise." "A code?" Stella's eyes lit with excitement. "Or just sentimental nonsense," I replied, though I didn't believe it. Something about the photograph had sent a shiver of recognition through me, like a memory I couldn't quite grasp. "The Hawthorne estate," Stella mused. "Isn't that the old mansion out by Weequahic Park? The one that's been abandoned for decades?" I nodded, surprised by her knowledge. "Most locals don't even remember it exists. I photographed the exterior last year. The city was considering demolition but backed off because of potential historical significance." She leaned forward. "But I never connected it to you." The mansion had always been a strange shadow in my family history, mentioned rarely and always with a tightness around my mother's mouth. I'd only visited once as a child, before it was sold off to developers who subsequently went bankrupt. "I don't talk about it much," I admitted. "There's a lot of baggage there." Stella waited, her silence an invitation rather than a demand. "My grandmother was Newark aristocracy," I continued, surprising myself with my openness. "Old money, big business, social connections. The estate was their summer home, if you can believe anyone needed a mansion just for summer." "And you didn't follow the family tradition?" I laughed without humor. Cartography wasn't exactly what they had in mind for the Clark heiress. My parents expected law school, a strategic marriage, children with appropriate pedigrees. "So you rebelled?" "I chose my own path," I shrugged, downplaying the years of tension, the final blazing argument where my father had given me an ultimatum: conform or be cut off. I haven't spoken to them in almost a decade. They live in Europe now. Stella's hand covered mine briefly. "Their loss." The simple validation warmed me more than it should have. I pulled my hand away, gesturing toward the photograph to hide my reaction. "This must have been taken right before the crash." "My family lost almost everything in 29. "Not everything, surely. The Clark name still carries weight in Newark. They rebuilt differently. Less visible wealth, more strategic investments." I hesitated. My trust fund would have been substantial if I hadn't walked away from their expectations. Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You gave up wealth for freedom." It sounded noble when she said it like that. In my darkest moments, during lean months when clients were scarce, I sometimes wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. But looking at Stella, her eyes bright with admiration, I felt certain again of my choices. "What about the mention of a key?" she asked, returning to the photograph. "And roses meeting water?" The estate had famous gardens. There was a rose pavilion that extended over the lake. The memory came suddenly. A childhood visit, my grandmother elderly but still elegant, showing me the overgrown pathways that had once been the pride of Newark society. "We need to go there," Stella said, the adventurer in her clearly excited. "Tonight." "Tonight?" "It's probably locked up, maybe even guarded." She raised an eyebrow. "Afraid?" It was a transparent attempt to provoke me, and it worked beautifully. "Fine. But just to look, understand, no breaking and entering." 2 hours later, we were parked half a mile from the estate, approaching on foot through woods that had once been carefully manicured grounds. The mansion loomed ahead, silhouetted against the night sky, windows dark, stonework crumbling in places, but still magnificent. "My grandmother's family built this in 1882, I whispered as we paused at the edge of the clearing. It changed hands a few times before my grandfather bought it back as a wedding gift to her in 1920. "Quite the present," Stella murmured. She never seemed particularly grateful. There was always sadness about her when she spoke of this place. As we crept closer, I found myself telling Stella more than I'd told anyone, about my isolated childhood, about the expectations that had suffocated me, about my decision to walk away from privilege toward uncertainty. "You're braver than you give yourself credit for," she said, as we circled toward what had once been the garden entrance. Her words caught me off guard, as did her hand finding mine in the darkness. I didn't pull away this time, letting our fingers intertwine as we navigated the overgrown path. The weight of family history pressed around me, but Stella's presence somehow made it bearable. We stood before the remaining structure of the Rose Pavilion, moonlight reflecting off the still surface of the lake beyond. The photograph's cryptic message echoed in my mind: the key lies where the roses meet the water. "Maybe it's not metaphorical," Stella suggested, kneeling to examine the crumbling stonework where the pavilion's foundation met the lake's edge. Her fingers found something in the moonlight, a small metal box wedged between stones, nearly invisible with age and corrosion. Our eyes met, mutual excitement passing between us, as she carefully extracted it from its hiding place. "After all this time," I whispered, hardly believing what we'd found. "We should get out of here," I whispered, suddenly aware of how exposed we were under the moonlight. The metal box felt impossibly heavy in my hands, as if weighted with decades of secrets rather than its actual contents. Stella nodded, her usual bravado momentarily subdued by our discovery. We retreated through the overgrown garden, constantly glancing over our shoulders until we reached the safety of her car. "My place or yours?" she asked, turning the key in the ignition. The question hung between us, loaded with potential meanings that made my heart race. "Mine has better lighting for examining whatever's in this," I replied, holding up the box and pretending that was the only consideration. Back at my apartment, we sat at my kitchen table, the mysterious container between us. Its surface was patinated with age, but a delicate floral pattern remained visible beneath the tarnish. "Should we open it?" I hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "Isn't that why we went there in the first place?" Stella smiled encouragingly, that adventurous gleam returning to her eyes. The box opened with surprising ease. Inside lay a stack of yellowed papers, what appeared to be hand-drawn maps, and several small keys tied together with a faded ribbon. The top document was a letter dated April 1923, addressed to my dearest M, and signed simply E. "Your grandmother," Stella whispered, leaning closer to me as I unfolded the fragile paper. The letter spoke of treasures secured and future safeguarded, but contained little concrete information. It concluded with a passage that made my breath catch. "What we have found will ensure our freedom when the time is right. Until then, trust no one with our secret." "They were hiding something valuable," Stella said, excitement coloring her voice. "But what?" We spent hours examining every scrap of paper, spreading them across my living room floor as midnight became 2 a.m., then 3 a.m. The maps appeared to show tunnel systems beneath Newark, with specific locations marked in a code we couldn't decipher. "We need historical records," I murmured, fighting exhaustion. "Newspaper archives from the 1920s, maybe property deeds?" "Newark Historical Society," Stella suggested, her shoulder pressing against mine as we leaned over a particularly puzzling document. "I know the curator. She'll help us." Rain began pelting against my windows, startling us both. What had been clear skies when we'd entered my apartment had transformed into a raging thunderstorm. "You shouldn't drive in this," I said, surprising myself with my boldness. "Stay." Something shifted in her expression, vulnerability breaking through her confident exterior. "You sure?" "Absolutely." I gestured toward my bedroom. "You can take the bed. I'll—" A tremendous crack of thunder shook the building, and the lights went out. Perfect timing, Stella laughed in the sudden darkness. I fumbled for my phone, activating its flashlight. Her face appeared in the pool of light, closer than I'd expected. "I'll find some candles," I managed, hyper-aware of our proximity in the darkened apartment. We assembled a collection of emergency candles on my coffee table, creating a warm island of light. Outside, the storm intensified, rain hammering against the windows with growing fury. "So tell me," Stella said as we settled onto my couch, mugs of hastily made tea warming our hands, "what made you become a cartographer? What draws someone to maps?" The question was genuine, lacking the condescension I often encountered. In the candlelight, with the storm isolating us from the world, I found myself opening up about my childhood fascination with atlases, how maps represented both escape and control in my rigidly structured upbringing. Maps don't just tell you where things are, I explained. They tell stories about what people value, what they fear, what they hope for. That's exactly how I feel about exploration, she replied, her eyes reflecting candlelight. It's never just about the place. It's about what it reveals. As midnight stretched toward dawn, we exchanged stories from our pasts, her tales of remote expeditions, my quieter journey of self-discovery through historical cartography. The storm raged on, sealing us in our own private world. I should confess something, Stella said eventually, her voice lower now. I knew who you were before the strawberry farm. I stiffened. What do you mean? Your work on the historical Newark Atlas. I'd been following it for months. She looked almost embarrassed. I may have engineered our meeting. You stalked me to a strawberry farm? I should have been disturbed, but instead found myself fighting a smile. I prefer strategically initiated a professional connection, she grinned. Though I didn't expect to like you quite so much. The admission hung between us, charged with implication. Outside, lightning flashed, briefly illuminating her face, the slight uncertainty in her expression, the question in her eyes. I'm not sure who moved first. Perhaps we both did. But suddenly her lips were on mine, tentative at first, then with growing certainty. My hands found their way to her hair, softer than I'd imagined, during all the times I'd thought about touching it. The storm outside seemed to mirror the sudden breaking of tension between us, powerful, inevitable, and strangely perfect in its timing. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, the candles had burned significantly lower. I've wanted to do that since I saw you holding that strawberry, she whispered against my lips. The morning sun streaming through my living room windows woke me gradually. I became aware of three things in quick succession. The storm had passed, my neck was stiff from sleeping on the couch, and Stella's head was resting on my shoulder, her blonde hair spilling across my chest. For a moment, I stayed perfectly still, not wanting to disturb her. The previous night felt like a dream. The discovery at the mansion, the storm, the confession, the kiss that had changed everything between us. Stella stirred, her eyes opening slowly. Morning, she murmured, making no move to create distance between us. Morning. I smiled, trying to ignore the flutter in my stomach. The power's back on. Shame. I liked the candlelight. I laughed softly. Very romantic, but terrible for examining historical documents. Her hand found mine, fingers intertwining naturally. No regrets about last night? The question was casual, but I heard the vulnerability beneath it. None, I said firmly. She smiled then, radiant in the morning light, and leaned in to kiss me again, this time with a confidence that made my toes curl. When we finally separated, I knew my face was flushed. Coffee? I offered, desperate for something to do with my hands. While I busied myself in the kitchen, Stella spread the documents from the metal box across my dining table again. The daylight revealed details we'd missed in our candlelit examination, faded notations in the margins, watermarks on the paper. Look at this, she called, excitement in her voice. I think these marks correspond to the city's old sewer system. I handed her a mug and peered over her shoulder. You're right. This map predates the 1930s renovation. How do you know about Newark sewers? Last year's project on urban infrastructure, she replied, taking a sip of coffee. I spent 3 weeks photographing the underground systems before they installed new pipes. I shook my head in amazement. I spent 3 weeks making sure my apartment plants didn't die. She laughed, the sound warming me more than the coffee. Different skill sets. Speaking of which, she tapped one of the marked locations on the map. I think we need to combine our expertise here. Your historical mapping knowledge and my exploration experience. You want to go into the sewers? I want to follow where this leads. Her eyes met mine, challenging and enticing simultaneously. Partners? The word carried weight beyond our investigation, and we both knew it. Partners? I agreed. After showering and changing clothes, we headed to the Newark Historical Society. Stella's friend Jessica, a curator with an encyclopedic knowledge of the city's past, granted U.S. access to archives usually closed to the public. The Hawthorne Estate, she mused when we explained our project, carefully omitting any mention of our nighttime excursion or the metal box. Fascinating property. Did you know it was rumored to have been a transfer point during Prohibition? Smuggling? Stella perked up. Possibly. The lake behind the property connects to a series of waterways that eventually reach the harbor. This new information sent us diving into shipping records from the 1920s. By afternoon, we had compiled enough historical context to make sense of our mysterious maps. "I think I've got it," I said eventually, comparing our findings with the faded documents from the box. "These markings aren't just sewers, they're connecting points between hidden speakeasies and storage locations." "Prohibition smuggling routes," Stella nodded. "But there's something else here. Look at these symbols. They don't match standard contraband notations." She was right. Certain locations were marked with a symbol that resembled a small flame or jewel. My grandmother's letter had mentioned treasures secured. Perhaps something far more valuable than bootleg liquor had moved through these channels. "We need to see one of these locations firsthand," Stella declared, the adventurer in her clearly itching for action. That's how we found ourselves, hours later, forcing open a rusted access door behind an abandoned warehouse that had once been a thriving textile mill. "Ladies first?" Stella grinned, holding up her high-powered flashlight. "Age before beauty," I countered, earning a playful shove that nearly sent me through the doorway. The passage beyond was narrow but surprisingly intact, its brick walls still solid after nearly a century. We moved carefully, comparing our surroundings to the aged map. "If we're right, there should be a chamber about 50 feet ahead," I whispered, though I wasn't sure why I was keeping my voice down. "There," Stella pointed to a metal door embedded in the wall ahead. The lock was ancient but held firm despite our efforts. Then I remembered the small keys from the metal box. The third one fit perfectly, turning with a reluctant groan of metal against metal. The door swung open to reveal a small room, empty except for a wooden desk against the far wall. Disappointment washed over me until Stella's flashlight beam caught something glinting in a crack between the floorboards. "Hold this," she said, handing me the light as she knelt to investigate. With careful fingers, she extracted a small tarnished necklace, a silver pendant on a delicate chain. When she brushed away decades of dust, we could see it was shaped like a key. "Another clue, not the treasure itself," she murmured, standing to examine it under the light. As she rose, she suddenly stumbled against me, her body pressing mine against the wall. For a moment we stayed frozen, the flashlight casting strange shadows as our faces hovered inches apart. "We make a good team, Lydia Clark," she whispered, her breath warm against my lips. "The best," I agreed, and closed the distance between us. The necklace key became our obsession over the next few days. We spent hours at my dining table examining it under magnifying glasses, researching similar designs, and trying to match it to the locations marked on our maps. "There's something engraved on the back," Stella said on our third night of investigation. "Looks like a date, September 12, 1924. I searched through our compiled research. That's when the Hawthorne estate hosted the Autumn Charity Gala, one of Newark's biggest social events that decade. What if they used the event as cover for something else? Stella's eyes sparkled with excitement. A room full of elite society would make excellent camouflage for a major exchange. The theory made sense. We were piecing together a story of bold deception beneath Newark's respectable surface, a tale of forbidden relationships and hidden treasures that somehow connected to my grandmother. My phone buzzed with an email notification, interrupting our theorizing. I glanced at it absently, then froze. "What is it?" Stella asked, noticing my expression. "An invitation to consult on a historical property assessment." I turned the phone toward her, from Clara Hughes. "Hughes?" Stella frowned. "Like the development company?" "Hughes Historical Holdings. They're notorious for buying historical properties and redeveloping them into luxury condos." I scrolled through the email. She specifically mentions the Hawthorne estate. "That's too convenient to be coincidence," Stella said, taking the phone to read the email more carefully. "She's offering an absurd amount of money for a simple consultation," I added. "Something doesn't feel right." As if on cue, Stella's phone chimed with a text. Her face darkened as she read it. "Someone just offered to buy exclusive rights to my Newark underground exploration photos, particularly any showing the old tunnel systems." We stared at each other, the same suspicion forming in both our minds. "Someone knows what we're looking for," I said quietly. "And they're trying to figure out how much we know." That night, after Stella left to pick up fresh clothes from her apartment, I found an envelope that had been slipped under my door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with typed text: "The Clark family secrets should remain buried. Stop now." My hands trembled as I called Stella. Someone was at my apartment. "Pack a bag," she said immediately. "You're staying with me tonight." 20 minutes later, I was in her car, a hastily packed overnight bag at my feet. I'm being ridiculous, right? It's probably just a prank. Better safe than sorry. Her hand found mine in the darkness. "Besides, I've been looking for an excuse to get you to stay over." Despite my anxiety, I smiled. In just a week, Stella had become central to my life in a way I hadn't thought possible. My apartment, once my sanctuary, now felt empty without her in it. Stella's loft was exactly as I'd imagined it. Exposed brick walls covered with maps and photographs from her expeditions, furniture that prioritized comfort over style, and equipment for her next adventure stacked neatly in corners. "It's not much," she said, suddenly seeming nervous as she watched me take it all in. "It's perfect," I replied honestly. "It's completely you." She smiled, visibly relaxing. "Make yourself at home. Bedroom's through there if you want to put your bag down." The domesticity of the moment struck me, how natural it felt to be here, how easily we'd slipped into this partnership that was rapidly becoming something deeper. In my previous relationships, this stage had always felt awkward, tentative. With Stella, it felt inevitable. After arranging my things beside her bed, trying not to focus too much on the intimacy of that act, I returned to find her spreading our documents across her dining table. "I've been thinking," she said, her expression serious. "What if Clara Hughes knows exactly what's hidden? What if her family has been searching for it for generations?" "That would explain the warning," I agreed. "And the sudden interest in our research." We stayed up late strategizing, eventually deciding I should accept Clara's consultation offer. It would give us a chance to learn what she knew while pretending ignorance ourselves. Later, as we lay in Stella's bed, her arms wrapped protectively around me, I whispered, "I'm not used to having someone to face problems with." She tightened her embrace. "Get used to it." I turned to face her in the darkness. "This is happening fast, isn't it?" "Too fast?" There was vulnerability in her question. "No," I said with certainty that surprised even me. "Just right." The next morning brought another unwelcome surprise. Someone had been through Stella's mail, leaving her building's lobby door conspicuously ajar. Nothing was taken, but the message was clear. We were being watched. "What do they think we know?" I wondered aloud as we drove to meet Clara Hughes. "Something valuable enough to scare us off," Stella replied grimly. "Which only makes me more determined to find it." As we pulled up to the sleek downtown office building that housed Hughes Historical Holdings, Stella squeezed my hand. "Remember, we know nothing. We're just a cartographer and a photographer working on an innocent historical project." "Right," I nodded, heart pounding. Nothing to hide. But as the elevator carried us upward to meet Clara Hughes, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking straight into a trap. Clara Hughes wasn't what I expected. Instead of the ruthless developer I'd imagined, she greeted us with a warm smile and genuine enthusiasm for historical preservation. At least, that's how she presented herself. "Miss Clark, your cartography work is exceptional," she said, gesturing for us to sit in her immaculately decorated office. "And Miss Bryant, your Underground Newark series was breathtaking." She was in her late 40s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of confidence that comes from generations of wealth. I immediately distrusted her. "Thank you for meeting with us," I replied, keeping my tone professionally neutral. "Your email mentioned the Hawthorne estate?" "Yes." Clara leaned forward, perfectly manicured hands clasping on her desk. "My company is considering restoration rather than redevelopment. We'd need detailed historical mapping and documentation." She presented the project beautifully. A vision of restored gardens, historically accurate renovations, public access to what had once been a private showpiece. If I hadn't received that threatening note, I might have been excited. "Why our particular expertise?" Stella asked casually. Something flickered in Clara's eyes, so brief I almost missed it. "Your reputations precede you, best in your fields." The meeting continued with discussions of timelines and budgets, all seemingly legitimate. As we prepared to leave, Clara mentioned almost offhandedly, "I understand you have family connections to the property, Miss Clark?" My pulse quickened. Distant history. My grandmother's family owned it briefly. Elizabeth Clark, née Hawthorne. Clara nodded. "Fascinating woman. Did you know our families were once connected?" My grandfather Richard Hughes was quite close with the Hawthornes. The name hit me like a physical blow. Richard Hughes. The same name that had appeared in several documents from our metal box, always in Margaret's handwriting, always with undertones of fear or anger. I didn't know that. I managed to respond evenly. As the elevator doors closed behind us, Stella and I maintained our composure until we reached the safety of her car. "Richard Hughes," she said immediately. "He's mentioned in those letters." He was some kind of business associate, I recalled. But Margaret seemed to despise him. We spent the rest of the day at the Historical Society, digging deeper into the Hughes family history. What we discovered painted a disturbing picture. Richard Hughes was a business rival of your great-grandfather, Stella summarized as we pored over old newspaper clippings. When the crash happened in 1929, he somehow acquired most of the Hawthorne assets at a fraction of their value. "Convenient timing," I muttered. "There's more." She pointed to a society page from 1923. "Look at this engagement announcement. Richard Hughes was briefly engaged to your grandmother Elizabeth." The photograph showed a young Elizabeth, her expression unreadable, standing beside a smug-looking man in an expensive suit. The engagement had apparently been broken off just weeks later. "My grandmother married my grandfather the following year," I said slowly, pieces falling into place. "But these letters to Margaret started before that." As evening fell, we returned to Stella's loft, our discoveries weighing heavily on us. We spread everything on her kitchen table. The original documents, our research findings, the mysterious key necklace. "I think I understand now," I said quietly. "My grandmother and Margaret were lovers." "The letters certainly suggest that," Stella agreed. "But in 1923, such a relationship would have been impossible publicly. So she was forced into an engagement with Richard Hughes to maintain appearances. Then something happened," Stella continued our theory, "something that gave her leverage to break the engagement. Perhaps whatever treasure they hid. And Richard Hughes has been looking for it ever since," I concluded. Now his granddaughter continues the search. We sat in silence, contemplating the parallels between past and present. Two women falling in love, facing opposition, protecting a shared secret. "I need to tell you something," Stella said suddenly, her expression serious. "When Clara first contacted me about photographing Newark's historical sites, she specifically asked about the Hawthorne estate." I stared at her. "When was this?" 2 months ago." She couldn't meet my eyes. "Before we met." The implications hit me slowly. "You knew about my connection to the estate before the strawberry farm?" "Yes." "So meeting me wasn't coincidence." My voice sounded strange to my own ears. "You sought me out because of my family name." "Initially, yes," she admitted, finally looking up. "I was trying to trace the history of several properties. Your name kept appearing in the research." "So I was just research?" The hurt in my voice surprised even me. "Part of your project?" "At first," she said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. "But Lydia, what happened between us is real. You have to believe that." "I don't know what to believe anymore." I stood up, needing distance. "Did Clara hire you to find me?" "No, I was genuinely researching these properties. Clara showed interest in my work, but I never told her about you." I wanted to believe her, but doubt had taken root. Every moment we'd shared was suddenly suspect. The strawberry farm meeting, the convenient appearances of clues, even our growing feelings. "I need some air," I said, moving toward the door. "Lydia, please." She rose to follow me. "I should have told you sooner, but I was afraid of losing you." I paused at the door. "That's the problem, Stella. You didn't trust me enough to be honest. How can I trust anything else about us?" The hurt in her eyes was genuine, but I couldn't separate truth from manipulation anymore. Without another word, I left, the door closing behind me with devastating finality. 3 miserable days passed without Stella. I threw myself into work, taking on a rush mapping project that required 18-hour days hunched over my drafting table. It was easier than thinking about her betrayal, or worse, wondering if it had been a betrayal at all. On the morning of the 4th day, a delivery arrived at my apartment. Breakfast from my favorite cafe and an envelope containing old maps I'd never seen before. The note read simply, "I'm sorry. When you're ready to talk, I'll be waiting. S." I stared at the maps for hours, professional curiosity eventually overcoming my hurt feelings. They were original survey documents of the Hawthorne estate from 1885, showing details that weren't in any public archives. Where had she found these? By afternoon, my resolve crumbled. I texted her, "Where did you get these maps?" Her response came immediately, "My apartment." 20 minutes? The ride to her loft was the longest of my life. When she opened the door, the circles under her eyes matched my own, and I fought the urge to reach for her. "Thank you for coming," she said, stepping aside to let me in. Her dining table was covered with even more documents, old photographs, ledgers, and what appeared to be personal journals. "What is all this?" I asked, keeping my distance. "The truth," she replied. "Clara's been feeding me information for months, hoping I'd lead her to whatever's hidden. I didn't realize it until after our fight." She showed me emails from Clara, gradually escalating in urgency, all focused on locating historical documents related to the Hawthorne estate. "I was being used," she admitted. "But everything between us is real, Lydia. I swear it." I wanted to believe her, needed to, if I was honest with myself. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I was afraid," she said simply. "Afraid you'd think exactly what you did think, that my feelings weren't genuine." The vulnerability in her eyes broke through my defenses. "I missed you," I confessed. Her smile was immediate, relieved. "I missed you too, so much." She stepped toward me hesitantly. When I didn't back away, she reached for my hand, her touch sending familiar warmth through me. "Partners again?" she asked. "Partners," I agreed, the word carrying all the weight of what remained unspoken between us. Over breakfast, technically lunch, but who cared? We developed a new strategy. Clara clearly believed we knew more than we did. Perhaps we could use that to our advantage. "She's hosting a gala at her estate tomorrow night," Stella explained, pulling up an invitation on her phone. "Historical preservation fundraiser. She specifically requested I attend and bring my research partner." "It's a trap," I said immediately. "Obviously." Stella grinned. "But it's also access to her private collection. If she's been searching for this treasure for generations, she must have pieces we're missing." "You want to break into her office during her own gala?" "I prefer conduct unauthorized research," she corrected with a wink. "But essentially, yes." The plan was audacious and probably idiotic, but it was also our best chance to discover what Clara really knew, and to protect whatever my grandmother and Margaret had hidden. The following evening, I found myself in a black cocktail dress I'd forgotten I owned, entering Clara Hughes' sprawling estate on Stella's arm. The mansion was newer than the Hawthorne estate, but built to similar scale, a modern monument to old money. "Remember," Stella whispered as we accepted champagne flutes from a passing waiter. "We mingle for an hour, then I create a distraction while you slip into her study. Then I find, what exactly? Anything connecting Hughes to the Hawthorne treasure. Something that explains why they're so obsessed with finding it." Clara spotted us from across the room, making her way through the crowd with practiced grace. "Miss Clark, Miss Bryant, I'm so pleased you could join us." We chatted about historical preservation, maintaining our cover as enthusiastic professionals. When Clara was called away to greet other guests, Stella leaned close to my ear. "Her study is down the hall to the right of the grand staircase. I saw it during my site visit last month." An hour later, right on schedule, commotion erupted from the garden terrace. I slipped away as all eyes turned towards Stella, who had accidentally spilled wine on a prominent city councilman. Clara's study was unlocked, almost suspiciously so. I quickly photographed documents on her desk, then moved to the filing cabinet. In the drawer labeled Acquisitions, Pending, I found a thick folder on the Hawthorne estate. My heart nearly stopped when I saw what was inside, dozens of photographs of Stella and me, at the strawberry farm, outside my apartment, entering the historical society, even kissing in my doorway that first night. We hadn't been following the clues. We had been the clues, leading Clara straight to whatever she sought. Footsteps in the hallway forced me to shove the file back. I barely made it behind a curtain before Clara entered, accompanied by a security guard. "They'll make their move tonight," she was saying. "Be ready." I remained frozen behind the curtain, barely breathing as Clara continued her conversation with the security guard. "They've been following the trail for weeks," she said. "Grandmother was right. Use the right bait and they'll lead us straight to it." "And if they don't cooperate?" the guard asked. "They will," Clara replied confidently. "People in love make predictable decisions." When they finally left, I waited an excruciating minute before slipping out. I had to find Stella immediately. The gala was in full swing when I returned to the main hall, eyes scanning desperately for blonde hair in that blue dress. I found her near the champagne fountain, maintaining her cover while clearly watching for my return. "We need to leave," I whispered urgently when I reached her. "Now." "What did you find?" she asked, already moving toward the exit. "We're being played. Clara's been watching us the whole time, expecting us to lead her to whatever she's looking for." Outside, safely in Stella's car, I explained everything I'd overheard. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. "So we've been puppets in her treasure hunt," she said bitterly. "But why? What could possibly be so valuable after all this time?" The answer came to me suddenly. It's not about value, it's about legacy. Remember what my grandmother wrote? "What we have found will ensure our freedom." Evidence, Stella realized at the same moment. Blackmail material. We drove straight to the Historical Society, using Stella's after-hours access to break every rule in the archive handbook. By midnight, we'd found what we needed: newspaper accounts of Richard Hughes's meteoric rise after the crash, accompanied by rumors of blackmail and fraud. "He didn't just acquire Hawthorne assets," I said. "He systematically destroyed families who opposed him, except my grandmother's." "Because she had something on him," Stella concluded. "Something she and Margaret hid away as insurance." The final piece clicked when we returned to the original photograph. "The key lies where the roses meet the water," I read again, finally understanding. "It's not about the pavilion, it's about the reflection." Dawn was breaking when we arrived at the Hawthorne estate, this time heading not to the Rose Pavilion, but to the boathouse half hidden on the lake's far shore. Inside, guided by the first light, we found carved roses decorating the ceiling beams, positioned so they would reflect in the water at sunrise. There, Stella pointed to a loose floorboard directly beneath the reflection. The metal box we uncovered was larger than the first, its lock matching the necklace key perfectly. Inside lay ledgers documenting extensive fraud, forged documents, and most damning of all, Richard Hughes's written confession, apparently extorted by my grandmother in exchange for her silence. "This would have destroyed him," I whispered. "And Clara knew it existed. But not where to find it," Stella added, "until we led her here." On cue, we heard footsteps on the boathouse dock. Clara stood in the doorway, flanked by security. "I must thank you both," she said coldly. 3 generations of my family have searched for those documents. To destroy evidence of your grandfather's crimes, I accused. To protect our legacy, she corrected. "Now, if you'll hand those over?" "Actually, no." Stella's voice was calm as she held up her phone. "I've been live streaming this entire expedition to my professional account, including your confession just now." Clara's face drained of color. "You're bluffing." "Check Instagram," Stella replied. "I have quite a following." The crowd gathered at the Historical Society's emergency press conference that afternoon was the largest in the organization's history. Standing before evidence displays and enlarged photographs, I told my grandmother's story, how she and Margaret had gathered evidence against Richard Hughes, using it not for personal gain, but as protection for themselves and others he had wronged. Elizabeth Clark and Margaret Bryant were more than business associates, I concluded, my eyes finding Stella in the audience. They were partners in every sense, forced to hide their relationship, but determined to protect each other and seek justice however they could. Clara Hughes was notably absent, though her lawyers were already negotiating restitution to families affected by her grandfather's fraud. 6 months later, the restored Hawthorne estate hosted its first public event, the unveiling of my most ambitious project yet, a comprehensive historical atlas documenting Newark's forgotten stories. "It's extraordinary," Stella said, finding me alone in what had once been my grandmother's study. "You've mapped not just places but lives." I smiled, touching the edge of the atlas displayed on the antique desk. I had help from an expert explorer. Speaking of exploration, she handed me a leather portfolio. "My next project. Thought you might want to consult." Inside were plans for documenting historical sites across New England, a journey that would take months. "Seems like you need a cartographer," I observed. "I need you," she corrected, taking my hand. "Partner." The word had gained new meaning for us over our months together. Professional colleagues, yes, but also soulmates who had found each other against considerable odds, just like my grandmother and Margaret, whose photograph now stood framed on my desk. I love you, you know, I said, the words still new enough to make my heart race. I mapped that destination a long time ago, she replied with a smile, pulling me closer. Outside, spring sunshine glinted off the lake where roses once reflected, revealing paths forward that our predecessors could only have dreamed about.